You're live.
This is Senate Transportation, and we're resuming our testimony, and we're taking back up kit cars. And if you could introduce yourselves, tell us something about who you are and dive right in.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. I'm Rachel Stevens. I'm an attorney representing the Agency of Natural Resources. I'm joined by my colleague Deirdre Ritzer. She's the Mobile Sources Section Chief for the Air Quality and Climate Division at Department of Environmental Conservation. The Air Division is responsible for administering Vermont's emissions inspection requirements and program, and it's our job to ensure that motor vehicles comply with state and federal Clean Air Act requirements. I just wanted to acknowledge that I think we were asked to discuss both kit cars and S211, so we'll just, I guess, ask for you to let us know when to move on from kit cars. So our understanding is that there's not yet a bill proposal, but we understand that there is some interest in certain vehicles being exempt from emissions requirements. So we thought it would be helpful if we provided an overview of some of the legal concepts to the committee that the committee should keep in mind as it relates to emissions requirements. DEC did provide this summary of legal requirements to DMV, and so much of this information is provided in the legislative study that was just discussed. But I just wanted to summarize the high-level requirements to keep in mind. So the first requirement relates to emission standards. So all new motor vehicles, regardless of whether it's purchased or it's built at home, must comply with the latest emissions standards. These are required by the Federal Clean Air Act and implemented through DEC's low emission vehicle rules. The Clean Air Act requires all engines and vehicles to be covered by what's called a certificate of conformity from either EPA or California, demonstrating that all emissions requirements are met before they can enter into commerce. In Vermont, as you heard, we follow California's emission standards, and so all new vehicles must be certified. I wanted to make one point based on the previous testimony, just to clarify that it is possible that you have a vehicle that has a VIN and a registration, but that it is not legal to operate because it does not follow the compliant emissions requirements. So just wanted to make that clear. I'll just move on. So there is a kit car policy with the US EPA, and we have a copy of it we can provide to the committee. But this describes kit vehicles as those typically involving new bodies, used drivetrains, or new and used chassis. Fully assembled kit cars and complete what are known as kit car packages are considered motor vehicles under the Clean Air Act, and therefore they must follow emissions requirements, whether it's the EPA requirements or the California requirements. So this is an important policy because it clarifies that kit cars are motor vehicles and therefore must follow the emissions standards. There is another federal law that was discussed a lot this morning that I think is important for the committee to look into. This is what's known as the FAST Act, which is the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. This federal law has a legal exemption for emissions requirements and an exemption from state inspection requirements for low volume manufacturers that meet certain requirements for their vehicles. So this is known as the low volume manufacturer specially produced motor vehicle exemption in the FAST Act. We have some EPA guidance on the exemption, but from our perspective, this is the legal avenue with which manufacturers can get around certain inspection requirements for states. Moving on, I wanted to raise an issue that we heard from Jonathan this morning as well, just to reiterate. There are state and federal laws that prohibit anyone from altering the configuration of an engine or emissions control equipment beyond the installation instructions provided by the manufacturer. This is known as tampering, and it's prohibited by the Federal Clean Air Act. Even if the legislature decided to exempt certain vehicles from emissions requirements, it is still possible that these vehicles could be in violation of the federal tampering prohibition, because as Jonathan explained, it's prohibited for any person to alter the configuration of an engine or emission control equipment beyond what was originally certified and consistent with the instructions of the manufacturer. And this is a state requirement and a federal requirement. So the third legal issue that's at play here are emissions inspections themselves, which we heard discussion about earlier as well. So as you know, light duty vehicles, 16 model years or newer, must have an annual emissions inspection. We'll discuss when we talk about 211 that these emissions inspections are required by federal law. And as I mentioned previously, there is a federal exemption to state inspections under the FAST Act. And so we'd recommend that the committee take a closer look at that existing option. So the last legal issue I wanted to flag is related to tampering. It's something known as engine switching, which Jonathan mentioned in his testimony. So depending on if there is a bill proposal, there could be an issue with engine switching, which as I mentioned is tampering. This is for light duty vehicles. The installation of a light duty engine into a different light duty vehicle by any person would be considered tampering unless the resulting vehicle is identical, which means that it has the proper emissions configuration. So these four legal concepts are very important to keep in mind, and they would still potentially limit any state prohibition or state allowance that Vermont might consider. I did want to point out that DEC agrees that bill amendments could be useful to clearly define or clarify how specially constructed vehicles are defined and what the standards are. So we would be open to reviewing definitions that might be proposed to provide clarity in that space, and certainly available to provide specific comments if there is a bill. Happy to answer any questions.
Do you have questions about the emissions, or are you doing both?
No, we can do pit cars. Yeah.
I have a question not about the cars.
Okay. Should I move on to the other?
Let's move on and then we'll take questions.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So moving on to S211. This is the bill that would change the annual inspection requirements. I provided a handout to the committee yesterday that details the specific Clean Air Act requirements. So I recommend that the committee take a close look at that. I provided the citations to the statute, the federal law, the regulations. I also wanted to highlight an important federal court decision that came down last week from Federal District Court in New Hampshire. This is related to New Hampshire's attempt to roll back its state inspection program. I have a copy. I linked to the case in the handout, and I can provide a copy to the committee. So in general, the Federal Clean Air Act and the EPA implementing regulations set out the emissions inspection requirements that Vermont must follow. Vermont must demonstrate compliance with these requirements by submitting what's known as a state implementation plan to EPA for approval. The federal requirements assume an annual inspection frequency unless an alternative test frequency can meet an emissions performance standard. If this standard cannot be met with a biennial frequency, then the inspection program must remain annual. There is an alternative option where other changes to the inspection program could be made to offset the emissions reductions lost by moving to a biennial frequency, such as increasing the vehicle model years subject to the emissions requirement. So this assumes that moving to biennial will have an increase in emissions. And so in order to get that approved by EPA, we would need to demonstrate some emission savings by some other change to the emissions program. If the standard can be met with less frequent inspections and this bill becomes law, the DEC would have to amend its state implementation plan and seek EPA approval before it could be implemented. We are uncertain about whether a reduced inspection schedule could meet the federal performance standard under the Clean Air Act. To make this determination, DEC would need to undertake extensive emissions modeling. And if we do meet the performance standard, DEC, as I said, will have to undertake significant revisions to the SIP and get approval. So that is outlining the process for moving forward with any change to emission frequency.
Well, why don't you finish and then.
Okay, I had a few other points beyond the
make your
legal.
points and then.
Okay,
then
great.
we'll,
I think we're doing good on time.
we interrupt here. So go ahead.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we don't know whether the performance standard could be met until we do the modeling. Though in our expertise, we do expect that the change to a biennial inspection would increase air pollution in Vermont, including increasing ozone, air toxics, nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and carbon monoxide. This is because the longer time you have between inspections, it means repairs will be conducted less frequently, allowing vehicles with malfunctioning equipment to operate longer, causing harmful emissions to increase. I provided an example, which I think is, for me, was a pretty shocking statistic, but if a vehicle's check engine light is illuminated, this means the manufacturer has already determined that the emissions have increased by 50% or more due to an emission control system or part failure. This is why inspections are an important part of making sure that these issues are identified and repaired. It's our view also from the Air Division that increased air pollution has the potential to adversely affect populations or public health, especially for communities that live near increased traffic in areas with dense traffic. I also wanted to clarify something from previous testimony we heard. Just wanted to clarify that there are 28 states and DC, 28 states and DC that require emissions inspections. 11 of those jurisdictions require annual inspections, 13 of those require biennial inspections, and 5 of those jurisdictions have a mix of annual or biennial, depending on the vehicle age. In New England, Connecticut, and Rhode Island are biennial, and all the rest are annual. Also wanted to point out that we do expect this change to increase the cost of emissions-related repairs for vehicles. Regular inspections support early diagnosis, and timely repairs can often be less costly. For example, a poorly performing spark plug can cause the engine to misfire, which can quickly degrade the performance of the catalytic converter if repair is delayed. A spark plug repair itself is relatively inexpensive, while a catalytic converter repair, in addition to the spark plug, can be expensive. So from our perspective, delaying repairs can have a negative cost impact on consumers. It can also have an impact on warranty coverage because a vehicle's emissions warranty is based on the vehicle's age and mileage. If an emissions issue arises near the end of your vehicle's warranty, but you delay repairs due to an inspection being every other year, it's possible that you would miss out on warranty coverage for that repair. I think those are my high-level points I wanted to raise for the committee.
Go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Normally tries to give other people an opportunity first. Well, I really appreciate your analysis. I think there's one fundamental assumption that's wrong, which is that folks will delay repairs if they're not getting an annual inspection. What I've seen in some of the research I did in advance of introducing the bill was look at studies to see if folks actually did delay repairs because of inspections. Like, did they actually wait longer until they needed to get an inspection to actually do repairs versus why are people delaying repairs? And the main reason, it seems from the research that we had a study that was done in 2015 by the nonpartisan group that's like the JFO for Congress. They showed that, in fact, there's very little connection between people choosing to get repairs and inspections now, because what most of us see is a check engine light comes on.
Right.
You know, you see something is alerting you in your vehicle that something is wrong. So the reason for you not getting a repair isn't because you're getting an inspection and you're learning new information. It's because you either can't afford the repair, you don't have a qualified person who can do the repair, you're at a great distance to getting the repair done, or getting the repair done would delay your ability to use your vehicle. So what they found was the leading reason people didn't get repairs was time where their vehicle was not accessible to them, seemed to be the number one priority. So I actually think the underlying assumption that people will get fewer repairs is not accurate to the data that I've seen, at least in some of the research I've done. So I'd love to see a little bit more critical analysis on that point, if you've got it. But I did want to say, I really appreciate you bringing forward the fact that of states that are meeting the standard, 13 of them are doing it biennially. So we would need to make some changes, but it looks like there's other states that are fully complying and also doing it this way. So
Yeah,
I appreciate you raising.
Yeah, the performance standard can be met, which is like an emissions calculation model. Then there are options for inspection program to comply with the ARA.
Thank you. And I just also really appreciate your work in general. It's critical. And I think that this is like the key piece to the 2-year inspection conversation where the rubber hits the road. You know, how do we maintain the quality?
So
Okay. Okay, and we can take a closer look into the repair
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah.
and this comment and really might be that you need to go back and have some discussion about it. There's a timetable here. If we were gonna do stuff, we'd need to, go back to the feds and get waivers and do all of that. It would be helpful if there was a clear path that if we were gonna go forward with this, what does that look like for time? You know, could it be accomplished in a year? Are we really looking at a 2-year? What are the key points in each of those that we should research before we go ahead with this? Can you create that picture that is a realistic picture, not,
Yeah, I can
you know,
definitely,
we heard specifically from DMV in the financial piece, they said that whatever we did, do not do it in the middle of the year, make it a calendar year. So there are practical pieces that we would have to follow. And I think it's important for this community to understand those practical pieces before we took any steps.
so one practical piece would be the modeling itself. So this would probably take several weeks to conduct. There's some question about getting hold of the EPA staff that we would need to do that. But I think so the modeling itself could probably happen in several weeks. The real limiting factor when it comes to timing is getting EPA approval. That's why I pointed to the court case, because the court was really clear that unless and until EPA has approved the SIP revision, it cannot be implemented.
Yep.
And so that was my big takeaway from the court decision. So that's a bigger question. And I did want to point out for the committee that there are other issues with the state implementation plan now that are causing EPA concern in approving the SIP. So we are working actively with DMV to resolve those issues. But I think if we were going to introduce this as a new change to the SIP, it would be kind of grouped into those other discussions that we're having.
You know, here's part of just my thinking, and I'm not speaking for the whole committee. If we were going to research this to get ourselves out front and make sure all of our bases are covered before we get there, what are the questions we should be asking to get definitive answers to? What are the things that we should be out there moving us along to get the answers to before we, and so we need to ask the right questions. Second piece, and this is more for the Agency of Transportation itself, they're building an NBUS system whereby in January 1st, they want to go live with miles traveled for electric vehicles. Thus far, what we've heard is that would be based on them at the annual inspection taking the miles off the car. We're not clear about what the alternative to that might be. And those are all questions that I think we need some help answering. And so if we were going to do something to research those to get us in a position next January, or what are the things that we should be laying out and researching?
There are some topics, as I mentioned, that we've been in discussion with DMV and VTrans about how to improve the inspection programs if EPA will approve it. I don't necessarily want to testify about that without consulting them about.
No, I don't want you to. That's but
I think what we could do is, I do think that what you talked about, the mileage-based user fee, these other discussions that we're having related to the SIP and this discussion are related, because it relates to whether or not inspections are annual and how they function in our system. So I'm thinking, I mean, we, as I mentioned, at the staff and leadership level, we're talking frequently about these issues, and maybe we can circle back.
But I'm, the pressure we're under is particularly for lower income Vermonters. The inspection, is becoming more and more difficult for them. We frequently have people that have brand new cars come in and say, let us out. And so it becomes, so we are under pressure from constituents. There's hardly a place that any of us go now that we don't hear about this. So I think it's important for us to, what would the path be if we did, what's the pain to get there to do that? And we need that information. And I think everybody at the table wants to have the correct information and correct to be able to, here's what it would take to get there. Because we have to answer constituents that are, quite frankly, if we put it to a vote without any information out in our communities, I probably know what the answer will be, but we need a balance.
Right. I mean, I think there's two things that came to mind. So one is, I think what I've already shared, that I think we can, because we've been having active discussions about, we meet with EPA quarterly about our SIP, and we've met regularly with DMV to, talk about what we need to do to improve, that maybe we can, accelerate those leadership level conversations and see if we can come to some kind of agreement about what might be a path forward.
I'm not afraid to have this committee put something up that instructs you to do that and come back to us.
Right. That's understood. I did want to just mention also, which I'm sure the committee is aware, but we do at DEC operate an emissions assistance repair program that provides funding, and it covers, for low income Vermonters specifically, it can cover the cost of their emissions repair. I know much of the complaint that you're probably hearing is related to the safety inspection, which is not something that we can provide funding for or have oversight over. So from the emissions perspective, if it's an emissions related repair, we have funding to pay for that for low income Vermonters. And I know Deirdre's been testifying frequently to the other environment committees about that program, and it has sufficient funding available.
We'd like to continue this discussion in a smart way. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have several questions. Like Senator White, don't take the Christine of your word, very important. So the states that don't have emission inspections, are they get an exemption, or they just never had to follow the EPA regulation for?
They didn't have to follow. Yeah, so there's two things. States that are in non-attainment for their air quality standards have to have inspection programs, or states that are in the ozone transport region, which are specifically listed in the Clean Air Act, have to have inspection programs.
And we're not in the containment areas, right? Vermont.
We're in attainment.
So we're in attainment with all the criteria. So it's the reason that it applies to us is because we're in the ozone transport area.
Yes.
And that's all I'm doing.
Yes.
And so just wanted to clarify that. And then do we have an approved SIP now?
No.
And when was the last time our SIP wasn't approved?
Never.
Never.
Oh.
And
that's saying EPA has never had a federally compliant program.
right, the EPA has not.
That Vermont
Vermont.
has not had a program.
Right.
I mean, we have been working actively. Our last SIP submittal was in 2022. And there were a few deficiencies that EPA pointed out at that time. So we've been working actively to get those resolved. And I think we're close.
It seems this came up before years ago because I thought we had one approved in
Yeah.
1988 or something.
Yeah, we had a SIP submitted. All states had to submit in the 90s when the original additional requirements were in place, but EPA never approved our original submittal. But we did have one in 96.
Because when we started the emission inspections for the tablet, we had a bunch of problems, and that's when we started the program to pay for it because a lot of people were failing it, even though they probably should have, when we talked about it then, your predecessors came in and said, well, you know, we're worried about our SIP, but since, so don't change anything, but we're here, we're like, whatever, that's been 6 or 8 years later, we still haven't.
So
Still don't have a SIP.
we
So I'm a
did-
little worried about not doing something because we're afraid of our SIP won't get approved when we haven't had a SIP ever. You know what I mean?
there is significant legal risk because of the citizen supervision under the Clean Air Act, and that was the basis of the lawsuit in New Hampshire.
Right. So I understand that we'd have to ask for an exemption because we're in the ozone transport area, but my guess is,
Well, it wouldn't necessarily
That's what
be an
it is.
exemption. It wouldn't necessarily be an exemption. It would be following the process for. So we wouldn't have to get special permission. It would just be following the process. So if you want to move away from annual, which is the default, then you need to show compliance to the performance standard. So we had, previously we had always submitted our SIP as annual because that's what we did in Vermont. So if we move in that direction to try to do biennial and we can meet the standard, EPA can approve that.
and EPA could approve that we don't do it at all.
If, well, I
Don't
don't
do
know if
any
we could do
emissions.
zero.
Like New Hampshire.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if we could.
Why are we in
Model.
the ozone? Because my understanding we're in the ozone transport is because we're receiving the transport. We're not transporting any.
Right, I mean, it's related, to cross-border air pollution.
But it's more because it's crossing the border to us that we're in the zone. So I can't imagine, but maybe you can explain the legal argument of why we would be required to do emissions when we're not exporting any of the pollution we're concerned with.
It's part of maintaining air quality in the region, which has significant issues with ozone. So I mean,
But the ozone is not coming from Vermont.
I understand, yeah.
But that's just a thing difficult for, well, as the chair said, when we try to explain this for people who feel they're being harmed by the program. And we explain that we have this, non-approved SIP and we're in the ozone transport area, but we don't actually produce enough ozone to be out of compliance. But we're receiving this ozone from other states. It's a difficult argument to make that they need to spend more money. And to Senator White's point, this has been brought up before, a reason why we need a safety inspection that it will save money in the long run. And I think those examples you gave is true on those examples, but that's not how it works on the ground. Like that's not what happens. People go in and have to get a rotor work done for $1,200 when their car costs $2,000 and they don't have $200 to spare. And so they lose their car or they drive illegally. And there's a question about whether they needed a rotor job or is the rust on the,
Well, I
a real safety concern. So what's happening now is they're being penalized financially much more than any benefit from the safety inspection.
Well, I do think that's where I think it's kind of unfortunate that we've got the safety inspection and the
Yeah.
emissions that are coupled together. And there's a separate set of requirements. But as I mentioned, we have significant funds available for people, low-income people that need us. to
But the
cover
problem is not the
emissions.
emission inspection. Like, do you know how many failures we get from emissions a year?
Yes. 1 second.
Okay, because I think,
Continue with the
I would
question.
assume that of all the failed inspections, emissions is a small percentage. I know we had a problem when we first went to the tablets and the view system. And people had to drive around for a while before they test their car and things like that. But I think we solved that problem. But I'm glad we have that program for emissions, but I don't hear from constituents about costs from failing in the emissions. It's costs for us.
So in 2025, the total number of emissions failures was 13,888
You know,
out of, for the emissions inspections, it was 383,000. Total inspections, it was closer to just under 500,000. 401,000.
Okay, a small percentage, but still a decent number.
Yeah, I think it's
It's not
dropped
everywhere.
down to maybe about 4% of the annual emissions inspections
Yeah.
are failures.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And the check engine light, your handout said the check engine light on it means that there's an emission problem, but the check engine light could mean other things. but it's not always for emissions.
It is always for emissions.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I've got, really, that's
The-
what it's supposed to be on?
That's if a manufacturer decides that whatever the issue is has a potential impact to emissions, then it's the check engine light. The check engine light is only allowed to be used for an emissions related issue.
It's only allowed for, used for emissions, but if there's a problem with the system, the sensor itself,
Right.
that really doesn't have anything to do with emissions.
Other than if the sensor that is supposed to be monitoring that emission system and that emission system is failing, but the sensor's not working, that could also have an emissions impact. So that's why it's important to have it linked.
My most recent experience personally was the cable going from the sensor behind the grill to the central, the cable, was faulty. The cable, as soon as it was replaced, was, everything worked fine.
That's
So it
great.
was the cable itself, and the manufacturer, the auto dealer wanted to charge me $3,000. So I can understand how anybody that's in that position, would, I was like, $10,000 for that, for a little piece of cable. But so I would say to you, I understand what the system itself, but the parts that I don't consider part of. It's to get an answer, but it's a little maddening.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like, I know we didn't say this exactly in our statement, but motor vehicles are the largest source of air pollution and greenhouse gases in the state. And this inspection program is the strategy that EPA and states use to monitor compliance. So it's really our best tool to keep emissions under control from vehicles. And I understand there are a lot of challenges that consumers and motorists have, and that's why we've established a repair program to provide assistance. So that's the best.
And I don't think any of us want to go out around the
Yeah.
rules or anything. But there are places where there have been alternatives.
Yes,
And I think that what the committee would like to do is investigate what those are
Yeah.
and measure what the alternatives might be versus that. When we get the questions that are coming from the senator from Washington in that, and we go out into the public, I think we have to be able to say, if we don't decide to move ahead, this is why. And, or if we do, here's what the alternatives are, because I think we're very weird. We want to live within the rules.
well, right.
I would say this is not New Hampshire.
Right. Well, and at that, as we indicated, there are options, there is process,
Yep.
and we can certainly
And how
explore those.
do we ask the two agencies and all of it, how do we get the information we need to
I think probably the best that we can do is commit to debriefing with our leadership, having a leadership discussion with DMV, kind of debriefing this discussion.
What do
And
we-
then-
I think it's important for us that we put language someplace,
Right.
whether it's this bill or we have a number of bills going through, how we ask the right questions of you, so we have a path that we can either choose or not.
Okay. Understood.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I've learned a lot because I had a question about the check engine light because I thought that it could be lit for multiple things. But it's pretty interesting to know that that's not the case. Do we have, is there data that we can get from folks who are fixing cars on how, what's the how many engine lights issues are there in proportion to everything else? Because it seems relatively common to me.
We could look at the inspection data, because it provides, emissions failures. And it also provides the data on, safety failures. Not a lot of other granularity, like what was the
Right.
problem, but it separates the failures into safety versus emissions.
But I think you just told us that with the 13,000, right?
Yeah.
It's just, it's really interesting and it would be good to just know more.
Go ahead.
Just one question on the modeling you'd have to do. Is there any way to put a monetary number on what that might be? Maybe when you come back
Yeah.
and do your,
Okay.
you get together.
Probably, we have access to the model
Mhm.
now, so it would really be just staff time
That time.
associated with conducting it.
I mean, the word extensive kind of scared me.
Well,
But-
yeah, I guess it's not like the back of the envelope. We couldn't just do it
Right.
here. It requires,
Well,
Um,
even with staff time.
yeah, I mean, I think we estimated maybe 2 to 3 weeks of to have something, but we could try to drill down on that a little with the finer. Yeah. Good luck figuring on that.
I have more questions about the ozone transport, but I can also
Yes.
ask you
Okay.
here about how
Well-
that boundary was created. Because I thought at one point we heard that we asked to be included in, I mean, that there's like parts of Maine that asked to be taken out.
Well, it's in the Congress,
Right.
Vermont in,
I
with
think we were
the-
like, say, please
Amendment.
put us in.
I can, well, I mean, we can talk more about I don't know the history of like how Vermont was included, except that it's region based, it's for the Northeast.
Right.
So as part of being part of the Northeast. But I did want to mention there are other benefits to being in the
Right, that's what I've
Transport
heard, that's
region.
why we wanted to do it.
Yeah, we actually have Vermont specific extended warranties for vehicles. This is all in our low emission, zero emission vehicle rules. So there are a lot of consumer benefits and extended warranties that we get to benefit from by being part of the ozone transport region.
Are there other things or is that the main- other benefits?
I
Other
mean,
than clean air?
yeah, I mean, I think those are the main, we could try to spell those out so you could kind of have some like specifics.
Okay, I thought there was maybe something else, like by being a member of the transport region or area, we had other regulatory.
There is
Tools.
there is another program, I think related to permitting. Have to check my notes. But there are several, being our status in ozone transport allows us to implement
Yeah,
several different kind of regulatory programs. I can pull it up. I have it in my notes, or I can
yeah, we can do it.
stick around. Yeah. To be hopefully answer your questions. I know we have some homework to do,
Yeah.
DMV.
And, we are under, the legislature here is part-time and we're under a little time. We're down to 18 days before our president. So, if we clearly want to research the questions
Mhm.
and not just move ahead.
Right.
So if you could help us on how to think about and what to do, what's a good time to have, you and Agency of Transportation back about this?
We can talk to our leadership today and maybe let Megan know or just
Yeah,
get back
we
in
could do
touch.
that.
Okay.
Probably early sometime next week if we could.
Okay. Well, then I think something to consider in terms of, we had talked about the ultimate limitation is the EPA approval. That's something that could be considered for your effective date, for example. Considering that you could pass a law, but that it might not be able to be effective until, it's incorporated into an approved.
Well, we'll wait and see what you come back
Okay.
with to us and, because, we totally understand we don't want to be out of compliance.
Or we don't have groups that have, so.
I guess we are.
That's true.
Well,
Not go off the path.
but
Yeah.
there's out of compliance and
Yes.
there's out of.
Trying to be-
I'll just share, I mean, EPA has put us on a quarterly meeting schedule and they've signaled to us that we're their highest priority SIP. So it is important for EPA and that we get a SIP approved.
Yes, you know, we're out of compliance, but we're totally at the table working with them.
Mhm,
You know, there's one thing about being out of compliance
right,
and out in left field.
yes. They have confidence in our ability to get there.
Okay. Thank you both very much. This has been very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
And we will be back in touch and we'll want to hear what you have to say.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
and I
Thank
think
you.
at this point, it's time